Hi, many of you are going to be doing exams over the next few weeks, so this short presentation is to give you a few tips on how to spend your revision time wisely and hopefully do very well in your exams. You may be wondering, why me? What do I have to offer? Well, I've been a lecturer for over 20 years, and in that time I've taught many thousands of students how to pass their exams. I've also been a student myself during that time, and I've put my own techniques into practice to see if they work in how to revise and study and pass exams effectively. And I've also marked many thousands of exam papers. I still mark thousands even today, every year. So I've seen things from the marker's point of view as well. So the idea of this is to use all that experience to help you get all that knowledge that you need into your brain between now and the exam, and then get it out again correctly at the other end. So the first tip is to draw up a revision timetable, and I'd suggest that you do that by splitting up your available time into units of about an hour. The reason for that is that research shows that students can really only concentrate to the maximum for about 15 minutes, and after that your concentration starts to decline fairly sharply. So if you spend too long on one thing, you're basically not going to be able to absorb very much. So 1 hour maximum. After the hour, have at least 10 minutes running around, have a stretch, go for a walk, make a cup of tea, go to the toilet, something to break it up before you start on your next hour. Don't forget, when you're doing your timetable, to allocate some relaxation time, because if you study all the time, you're going to burn out before the exam comes around. And also, you're not going to be able to achieve that. Things are going to get in the way. So make sure you've got some rest time in there. You've built in some time for things to go wrong. Don't expect to spend every single hour revising. Having worked out how many hours you have available, divide that by the number of papers or units that you have to get an idea how long you have to spend on each subject. Now, you might want to weight that a little bit, meaning that if you have a subject that you find very difficult, you might want to spend more on that subject than a subject that you find quite easy. Having said all this, don't spend too long on your revision timetable. I remember myself when I was at school spending hours drawing up these beautiful multicoloured revision timetables that invariably I couldn't stick to, and then having to spend loads of time redoing them, which I could have been actually doing some revision. So do it quickly, get on with the actual work. In terms of how you organise the topics within each subject, Um, I like to think of this as a pyramid of revision. Now, what does this mean? Well, imagine you're doing a subject where you've got 5 different topics that you need to consider. One way of studying this would be to study topic number 1 thoroughly, then do topic number 2, then do topic number 3, and so on. The problem is that when you get to the exam, topic 5 is going to be very fresh in your memory because that was the one that you studied most recently, whereas topic 1, which you did a long time ago, you've probably forgotten. So I think a better approach is to basically build up your knowledge in layers, a bit like a pyramid. So level 1 is where you quickly go through everything, just basically refreshing your memory about the whole syllabus, noting as you go which bits you can remember easily, which bits you can't remember, and which things you now realise from the guidance that you've been given are not actually that important, and therefore you don't need to spend too long on them. Then you go through it all again. So on your second time through, that's when you maybe start making revision notes and mind maps, and you go right the way through the whole lot again. Topic 3, that's when you start doing practice questions and focusing much more on the key elements that you need to pass the exam. And by the time you get to your 4th time through, or maybe your 5th time through, you're very focused on the key areas that you need for the exam. Now, by doing it this way, by building up your knowledge in layers, when you get into the exam, it's not that long ago that you studied any one topic. You should probably remember quite a lot about it. I mentioned making revision notes and mind maps, and there's basically 2 different ways that are quite useful to record your key topic items as you're going through, so that you can keep looking at them to refresh your memory. So on this diagram here, there's an example of a mind map, And if you click on the link above, it will take you back to a previous blog post where I've talked about how you can draw a mind map. A mind map is basically a diagram that takes a topic and then you break it down into the component parts and you basically show how the topic's built up. This one I drew using an app called Simple Minds, which is very straightforward to use. I basically did this diagram never having used it before, but you could just equally well do it on a piece of paper with a pen, which would be quicker probably. So basically a diagram showing all the key aspects of a particular subject. This one just shows accounting for inventory, just as an example of what that might look like. Depending on your writing style, you might find that quite a useful way of remembering information. Alternatively, you could just write brief notes in bullet points. So here we have some bullet point notes using the same information as we had on the mind map in notes basically going down a page. So we've got the key bullet points, we've got the sub bullet points, we've got the sub bullet points as we get into more and more broken down information. So use whichever two of those you find useful or your own way of doing it. The point is to make them brief. And ideally, having done your diagrams or having done your notes, print them out onto small cards or small pieces of paper, make like a little revision booklet, and carry these around with you everywhere you go. And when you get a minute, look at them so that they're fresh in your memory when you come to the exam. Essentially making up your own summary revision notes. One of the very, very important things that you need to be doing to pass an exam is to practice questions. Certainly if you are doing accounting exams, there is a very clear link between how much practice you do and your chance of passing the exam. And my MBA dissertation was basically on that. And essentially, the more you practice, the more likely you are to pass. But that would apply to all papers, really. When you are splitting up your time within your hour units, maybe think about spending about a third of your hour reading, going through notes, a third of your hour practicing a question, a third of your hour reviewing your answer to see where you went wrong. If it's a written paper, then I would suggest that in the early days of your revision, you basically just write your answer as brief bullet points, because you want to get through as many past questions as you can to cover as many different styles as you can. As time goes on and you get closer to the exam, start writing out full answers, taking the amount of time that you would spend in the exam to practice writing the right length of answer. Now, let's say, for example, you've got a 3-hour exam and you have 3 essays to write. The first time you try and write an essay for an hour, it will probably go wrong. You'll either run out of time and your essay is too long, you don't get it finished, it doesn't conclude nicely, or you won't have enough to say and you finish too quickly. After a couple of times of practicing writing timed essays, you should be able to write your essay, structure it, get all the stuff that you want to include in that, and finish within the hour. And it doesn't take that many times of practicing it to see that starting to happen, but you do need to practice. If you have access to a mock exam, I would strongly advise that you do the mock exam. The point of doing the mock exam is to make the mistakes in the mock that you would otherwise make in the real exam. So if you can, get a mock exam, sit down with the right amount of time that your exam is. So if it's a 3-hour exam, you spend 3 hours, have a go at doing that. The more mistakes that you make in the mock exam and learn from them, the better your chances are of passing the real exam. When you're practicing all these questions, one thing to remember is don't panic. Don't panic if you get something wrong. The whole point of doing all these practice questions is to get things wrong now to avoid getting things wrong in the exam. So the key thing is to learn from your mistakes, work out what you did wrong now that you can avoid doing wrong in the real exam because you've learned from the mistake. From a marker's perspective, just remember that in numerical questions, if you get something wrong, it doesn't mean that you don't get any marks for that exam. What usually happens is you get follow-through marks. So if you have a 5-step process to do, if you make a mistake in the first step, obviously your final answer is going to be wrong, but the marker's going to follow through your wrong answer and in step 1, and if you've used it correctly in steps 2, 3, 4 and 5, then you're basically going to get almost all of the marks. Just make sure that you always give workings so they can see what you've done, so they can give you those follow-through marks. In written questions, you might think you've got the wrong answer, and you might have, but you might have also got an alternative right answer, because for many questions, there isn't only one right answer, there are a variety of right answers. If you're not sure, go and ask your lecturer. Don't be shy. However silly you think your question is, they've probably heard much worse than that in their time lecturing. But go and ask them, have I done this wrong? What have I done wrong here? Or have I given an alternative right answer that would get me credit? A good thing to do when you're practicing is to swap answers with your friends and give each other honest feedback. That's because when you're writing an answer, you think what you've written is very clear. You think you've explained it perfectly. If you didn't think that, you wouldn't have written that in the first place. Somebody else reading it might not quite get what you're trying to say. So by swapping answers, giving honest feedback to your friends about, do you really get what I'm trying to say here? Am I getting my point across clearly? You're both going to get much better at it. And it's a really good process to do. It's why anybody who writes articles, books, etc. in good publications, they're always proofread and checked and reviewed by someone else, because quite often they can see things that the author can't. So we're in the exam now. You're starting to panic. What do you do? Well, you need to start to breathe. And you might be thinking, well, I do breathe, otherwise I would die. Well, that's true. What I mean here, though, is slow breathing techniques, deep breathing, slow breathing, that calms down your central nervous system and helps your brain to start functioning again. Now, we've spoken about this in previous blog posts, and if you click on this hyperlink in the PowerPoint version of this presentation, it will take you to another web page that gives you some practice on breathing, gives you some advice on how to do that deep breathing technique. The thing to do is don't just do this in the exam. You need to start practicing this now before you get to the exam so that you can do it very, very easily. There's a link here to a really good article about the theory behind why breathing works. It's called Polyvagal Theory. It's an interesting article. At some point in the future, I'll probably write a blog post on this, but it's a good article to read. However, don't use that as an excuse not to do any revision. But practice that breathing so that when you need to do it in the exam, you have that technique available to you. Other things to think about in the exam. First of all, reading the question. Obviously, you can't answer the question unless you have properly read the question. So read it like a lawyer. Now, what does that mean? Basically, when a lawyer reads a legal document, they read every single word incredibly carefully. They notice what's there, they notice the punctuation, they notice the words that are not there. That's basically the way you need to be approaching an exam question. Because if you read it too quickly, you read it wrongly, you're going to answer it wrongly. So read it slowly, then read it back again to make sure you've read it correctly the first time. Sometimes it can be quite difficult to think of enough to write in answers to essay questions. So when you're reading an exam question, break it down and look for linking words. So for example, if you had a question that said, compare the responsibilities of internal and external auditors for the prevention, detection and reporting of fraud, you might think that is one requirement. You might think it's two, one for internal, one for external, but really it's six. It's responsibilities of internal for prevention, detection, reporting, responsibilities of external for prevention, detection, reporting. It's actually 6 requirements. Another example, calculate closing inventory at 30th of June and cost of sales for the month of June using the FIFO periodic method. That's 2 requirements, calculate closing inventory and calculate cost of sales. If you don't do both, you're not going to get full marks. Another example, family therapy is expensive, unpopular, has no evidence base, and provides more ethical dilemmas than individual therapies. So that is, you have to talk about expensive, unpopular, evidence-based, ethical dilemmas. So 4 sections there. So break the question down, make sure you answer all parts of the question, else you're not going to get full marks. Having read the question, you also have to write your answer. And you want to write your answer as clearly as possible, getting your point across very, very clearly. Now, one way to think about this is you have to pretend you're explaining this to a person who has no idea what you're talking about. And so when you're writing your answer, keep asking yourself, why is this happening? What's happening? What am I saying in this answer? If you can explain why, if it says why in your answer, you have got it across clearly. When you're practicing before the exam, again, give people your answers, your friends, other people that you know. Did you get your point across clearly? You could also give some examples briefly, because when your exam paper is being marked, sometimes the person marking it isn't sure, did you really understand or not? If you give a couple of very simple examples, it shows that you did understand. They can give you the benefit of the doubt. Presentation-wise, please try to be neat. There is nothing worse than marking hundreds and hundreds of exam papers and someone's handwriting is so appalling that you can't actually work out what they're trying to say. So please try to be neat. I know it's hard, especially at the end of a 3-hour exam, but certainly the beginning, you've got no excuse. And it's particularly important in essay questions. The marker is much likelier to be kind to you, to give you the benefit of the doubt if your writing is relatively neat. Try to write in short paragraphs with a line between each one. Make it easy for the marker to see where to award you marks by having each point in your answer as a separate paragraph with a space between that and the next paragraph. Try and use a dark pen because that will then have more contrast against the paper, which makes it easier to see. Underline your headings with a ruler and just think about showing some pride in your work, making it easy for the marker. The easier you make it for the marker, the nicer they'll be to you. Other things to think about, be very, very careful with timing. Over the years, I've seen so many students who basically overrun on one of their exam questions and they don't actually finish the whole paper. The key thing there is to work out how much time you have available for each question and each part of a question and only spend that amount of time. So if it's a 3-hour exam and it's 100 marks, then that is 180 minutes to get 100 marks. That is 1.8 minutes per mark. Work out how long to spend on each question. Don't overrun that. It's very, very easy to just finish off what you're doing before you go on to the next part of the paper. That's the way to end up failing, because those extra few marks that you're just trying to get are going to be quite hard to get. There are probably easier marks that you could get in another part of the paper by carrying on. So leave a space, do the rest of the paper, come back and finish off later if you have time. Do what you can't do. Don't worry about what you can't. What does that mean? Well, basically, many students, when they look at a paper, they see it as being 100% and they see all the things they can't do and I can't do that bit, I don't understand that bit, and they get really panicky. You don't need to get 100% to pass and you don't need to get 100% to get a really good mark. So try not to see the bits you can't do, just see that there is enough in that paper that you can do to get a good mark. A colleague many, many years ago used to joke with students that you should take whitener into the exam with you and cover up the bits of the paper that you can't do so that you can't see them and they don't put you off. Now that was obviously a joke and I wouldn't recommend that, but try not to get distracted by the hard bits. There are enough easy bits in exams for you to pass and that's what you need to focus on. Finally, make sure that you take care of yourself between now and the exam, because if you're not at your best performance, you're not going to give your best performance. So make sure you get plenty of sleep. It's very easy to burn the midnight oil, staying up really late. Try not to do that. You're not going to be effective if you're tired. Try and eat healthy food. Don't live off takeaways and ready meals. Eat healthy fresh food, eat fruit, vegetables. Fish is really good for the brains, eat lots of fish. And if necessary, start taking vitamins. If you feel yourself getting a bit sniffly, take some vitamin C so you're not getting a cold or flu before the exam. And practice the breathing exercises that I mentioned before so that you can actually do them in the exam if you're having a panic and you need to go on them then. So that's the end of the presentation, and I hope you found it useful. Good luck in your exam, and thank you for listening. If you'd like some more tips on various aspects of studying and mental health, have a look at my webpage and my blog, and also my Facebook page, Carpe Diem Counselling and Coaching. Thanks, and good luck again.